All right. Welcome back to the BPOS podcast. I'm super excited about my guest today. He is known as the man, the myth, the mustache, David Aguilar. Thanks for being here, man.
Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate that. I mean, the mustache has been the most recent thing of me, but everybody's been loving it. So it's a part of the brand now. My wife said I could never get rid of it.
It's legit. Oh, and before we get started, you just had another baby. Or you
Baby
didn't.
number-
Your wife just had another
Exactly.
baby.
She's just baby number 2. His name's Jack.
Awesome.
So
man.
Jack and Jordan are finally a duo.
Congratulations,
Thank you so
man.
much.
That's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
exciting. Well, hey, look, I'm glad that you reached out to me. Gosh, I guess it was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And invited me to come on your podcast,
Yes, sir.
which we'll definitely talk about. That was a lot of fun. And I learned some things about you that I didn't know, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have you here.
Yes, exactly.
But before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah.
We used to work together. That's how I know you.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah. So quick, life history in about 30 seconds. Born and raised in Brownsville, Texas. Was living there until I was 29 years old. Was early on in life, was by the age of 12, was addicted to drugs, was going nowhere in life.
Did you say 12?
Yeah. So by 12 years old, I was already doing like cocaine, smoking weed, drinking alcohol. So just life was not going anywhere, right? Found coffee, landed my way into Starbucks and found out that I was good at something, which was being a barista. Like I love making people happy. It was like the thing that I really enjoyed. So visited Austin one day, saw a coffee roaster at Mozart's, and I said, that's what I want to do for a living. I was about to be 30 years old, so I'm like, if I don't move out now, I'm going to stay stuck in this town like everybody else and do nothing with my life.
Right.
So me and my 2 friends packed up, moved, I think 3 months later for me visiting Austin. Still worked at Starbucks and then went to Mozart's to apply, and they were like, yeah, come on. Was a barista. 6 months to a year later, became their coffee roaster, and then went from a coffee roaster to a videographer. So while I was roasting coffee, I was always filming things on my phone. And Mozart's was like, hey, we'll pay you extra if you do that for us. And then it just seemed like every company I was going to was always like, we need a social media person. So then I just saved up enough money to buy a camera. This construction company hits me up and says, hey, we want somebody to pretty much Gary V our company, like do the ins and outs, show everything we're doing, all these installations we're doing. Did that for about a year, grew their company through their social media. And then COVID hit. I was let go from that job for many other reasons. But from that, ended up saying, like, what am I going to do? Either go back home with my new wife and, go back into the Brownsville lifestyle, gain a lot of weight, be around a lot of negative people, or double down on myself. So then started my own company, Meek Monster Media, and then with that branded myself as Ariel Austin, and then really took off in the drone world. A lot of my drone videos, drone photos, like were booming in Austin, so that kind of grew my account, and ever since then, been doing the video, social media content creation game.
That's awesome. Yeah, the Ariel Austin, like the cinematography, the video that you capture and put out. I mean, it's badass.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's really badass.
Yeah, and I didn't know that until people were telling me that. For me, at this point, I was like, I finished a bunch of contracts with people, so I'm like, I have nothing to do, and I was so bored where I'm like, I need to create, I need to do something. So this was during COVID. Nobody was out, nobody was doing everything. Everybody was locked up in their homes.
Yeah.
So I was very much like down because I'm like going to downtown Austin, what used to be the live music capital of the world, what used to be this booming economy, and there's nobody on the street.
Yeah.
And so for me, I saw there was so much fear going on. And so I thought, hey, let me put out beauty. Let me go. I was going to downtown Austin maybe 5-6 days a week.
Okay.
5 a.m, flying my drone, getting the sunrise, and being like, if you're afraid to go out and see the sunrise today, here, this is for you. So I just did that for almost like 6 months nonstop. And then that's what grew my account. There were a lot of real estate agents were like, can we use your stuff? Can we buy your footage? Can you film our home? And then that's what really started me going, was just drone work.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So how much of what you do now is drone centric and how much is,
social media.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now it's really gotten more towards the social media side of things, especially now that everything's kind of booming in Austin again, right? We got all our events, we got music, we got food, we got festivals, everything's going on. So nowadays the drone stuff has kind of calmed down, but I'm a videographer at heart. I love filming and I do photography as well. So it's like no matter what, there's always something for me to do. I love it. My wife at times hates it because it's always booking me up. But at the end of the day, for me, the thing that I've loved most about what I get to do is helping people tell their stories. So whether you have a really cool event going on and you need somebody to film it and capture it in a very beautiful way, I'm your guy. Or maybe you're a small company, right? That's my business ethos is I'm going to charge people a lot who can afford it. So the people who can afford it, right? Your food trucks and mom and pop stores that can afford a $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 budget.
Right.
Hey, I'll do it give me a gift card for $50 and I'll do it for you, right? Like at the end of the day, what I want to do is help people tell their stories and not allow money to be the thing that gets in between that, right? And so my philosophy is, you steal from the rich to give to the poor, right? So if you can afford a $5,000, $10,000 budget, boom, you're actually helping other people out as well.
Yeah. That's pretty noble, man. Yes, I remember when we worked together, you had all kinds of ideas about social media and you were shooting videos and I was like, I don't know, man. Is this really like a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how dumb I am. I'm a lot older than you are, though. So
well, and it's funny. I talked to my wife about that the other day too, and it really was just like I was, and this kind of even goes into social media and who you should be listening to, right? Because there's so many people out on social media at the time who were saying TikTok, or back then known as Musical.ly, oh, that's going to die. That's nothing. Or Instagram, they're going to die out, these people. But there was other people like Gary Vee and other men like that who were saying, no, you need to double down. You need to triple down on this. And so listening to those voices over the other voices really helped me to where I'm in my business right now.
yeah,
And that's kind of what I do with everything. There's a lot of noise in our world going on. In so many ways, right? And even talking about grief, right? There's so many ways that we can listen to people's advice in our pain, but we don't know how to decipher which one is the good and which one is the bad. And so sometimes we listen to the bad voices because there is no good voice to listen to. And so for me, when it came to social media, I was listening to the people who were really experienced in this world, who were working with Pepsi and Nike and all these bigger brands. And they're like, yo, these people are spending way more money now, and their budgets for the next 5 years are triple the amount. So if you think social media is going to die, so again, listening to those kind of voices really helped me get to where I'm at now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Listen to successful people and do what they do, right? Or do what they say versus non-successful people. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just contemplating my life now.
Yeah, right.
Thanks for that. Cool. Well, look, I'm glad that you came in. I'm glad that we talked a week or two ago. Same. And one of the things, well, let me back up. One of probably my favorite things about you when we worked together was the amount of positive energy
Thank you.
that you brought to the office, man. I mean, it was really refreshing.
Thank you.
It was really refreshing. I was bummed to see you go, but understood why, right? It's not a ton of money in coffee, as people who are in coffee know.
Yeah.
And it's hard to raise a family.
Yeah, exactly.
On a minimal hourly wage, production hourly wage. I get it, but the positivity, man.
Yeah.
It's just one of my favorite character traits for sure.
You. Yeah.
When we sat down and talked the other day, I learned that, you had a tragedy in your life. And I was totally blown away. Like, I had no idea. And, it's one of those things, it made me think, how many people do I meet that have no clue, what I've recently gone through? So, do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. And this was, there was something you said in one of your podcasts where you said, the experience of losing your son is something that has changed you for the better or the worse, right? And that's something that is never going to change, the change that happens after that. And so for me, my older brother passed away, I think it was 2021. And we had just found out that my son was going to be born.
Mm.
So my wife surprises me. I would say, let's say that was a Friday night, and we're like already planning. We're going to go to Brownsville to my parents, have a big thing. You know what I mean? And then Monday morning, my dad calls me and tells me that my brother passed away. And at this time, my brother and I, so he lived with my mom for years. He had a wife and 2 kids, and they always stayed with her. And so, but his wife was very controlling. She would never allow us to see the kids. Like, we lived in the same house for years, and I only remember my niece and nephew from like 5 years old. So they're 18 now,
Wow.
18, 19.
Okay.
So she was always controlling, and they would always get on in arguments. And so one day they finally move out, never to move back. And ever since that day, me and my brother never kept our relationship. Like, I would text them and I would try to hang out with them, but it always seemed like his number was changing when I was trying to reach out to him, right?
Mm.
And so after I moved to Austin, for almost 5 years, we just kind of never spoke. Every now and then we bumped into each other at my dad's house, but we had a good relationship. It wasn't like we hated each other, right? So the last thing I knew is that he had colitis, and he had like this health issue that stopped him from working. And so his wife started working, and then didn't hear anything about him for a while. My dad was trying to reach out to him for months, never heard back from him. And then, one day my dad calls me and tells me, your brother's dead. Which was a shocker, of course. Like, how, right? How, why, what's going on?
What, can I stop you right there real fast? What is colitis? I'm not familiar with that.
It's like a stomach issue, I guess. That there was like internal bleeding and other stuff that he just could not work anymore because he was getting real tired and just losing a lot of weight.
Got it.
And so I never really researched it. My mom's kind of the one who told me about it.
Right.
And so when my dad calls me and tells me that, I was kind of like, what's going on? He's like, I don't know what happened. So his experience was this was about 2 a.m. He's locking up the gates in the house because he's about to go to bed. I think the Spurs or somebody was playing, so it was a long game. So he's like, I'm going to bed. And then he sees my brother's car pull up, and he's like, oh, he's probably gonna come and get some like pain pills or something that he needs because my brother had gotten in a car accident and was on pain pills, and sometimes they weren't enough. And so my dad walks outside and he sees his wife and 2 kids walk up. And she's crying, and the kids are crying. And she's like, Junior's about to die. You have a few hours to see him. You need to hurry up. So he goes, and my brother's like in all these ventilators and all this kind of stuff.
He was in the hospital.
He was in the hospital, yeah. And apparently he was in the hospital for maybe 3-4 months. Nobody knew about that.
What?
Yeah, and so then she tells my dad, you could see him, but you can't tell anybody that what happened. Like, okay, so you're not, like, he wasn't supposed to tell anybody that my brother died. So then my dad ends up, again, calling me the next day, tells me the whole story. And so now what was going to be a joyful moment in Brownsville, breaking the news of a grandson, has become a haunting, painful experience, right? My mom doesn't even know. So I have to go and tell her that her son is dead.
So you're going down there to break the great news that she's a grandmother. And instead, now you have to break the terrible news that her son is gone.
Yeah. And I actually journaled that, and I read the journal yesterday to be like, okay, like, you've kind of pushed it back. Like, let's go back in and see what happened. And haunting is the word that kept appearing. Like, it just felt like this haunting fear over my life, And in the journal, I talk about just how it seemed like time flew by while I was there, but every second was taken an eternity, right? So we get to Brownsville. My mom is ecstatic, right? She's like, oh, because we're usually there for 2 days, 3 days max.
Yeah.
And we're there for a week, we're going to have it up, right? And my mom runs out and she's like, hey, how are you guys doing? This and that. She's a joyful person, so just a lot of energy. But I knew what I had to tell her. And so I'm like, hey, can we go inside and talk? She's like, yeah, like, is everything okay?
So that was the first thing you did when you got there.
Thing.
Like, okay.
Because for me, I guess so from Austin to Brownsville, it's a 6-hour drive.
Yeah.
So the entire drive, I'm just thinking to myself, what I'm one, reading the Bible, two, reading C.S. Lewis, A Grief Observed, and three, journaling. And so what I'm doing is just saying, how am I going to handle this? What am I going to say? How is she going to react? So then, I think we take a 2-3 hour break. I call my stepdad and I'm like, hey, I don't know if my mom knows yet, but Junior's died. I don't know if she's going to read the obituary, if it's anywhere in the newspaper, but if she finds out in any way, just be there for her. I'll be there in the next 3 to 4 hours. So then, we get to Brownsville and I sit her down in the living room and she's like excited because she's like, I haven't seen you guys in months,
Right.
and we're here for a week now. And so it's nothing but excitement. And I just tell her, Dad called me yesterday morning and told me that Junior's dead. And I think I told you this, but for maybe a year, her screams and her cries kept me from sleeping, kept me from so many things. It was hard to sleep because I would just wake up with that scream, and her rocking back and forth. And it was just very, very haunting those 6 months to a year. And so all we could do is hold her, right? My stepdad was there who was being real strong. My younger brother was there who was being strong. And, all we did was just hug her as she cried and cried. And then, of course, my aunt comes in, my grandma, my grandfather was still alive. And, this is a beautiful image that I still remember. And while I was reading about it yesterday, it was like, I remember there was after an hour of just tears, there was a break where she goes into my grandfather's room. He had about 6 months to live. And she tells him, Dad, Junior's dead. And so she's kneeling at his bed, holding his hand. And he tells her, I understand, but you still have a family to take care of. And you still have those 2 boys to watch over. Junior may have died, but they're still alive.
Yeah.
You need to stop crying. You need to stop acting this way. And you need to start facing what just happened. That hit me when I read that yesterday, because there's that change, right? That change where it's like, what changed from my brother's death to now? I think one of the things that's been growing more in my heart is you need to start paying more attention to family. Like, you love working. You're a freaking workaholic. You can work from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m.
Yeah.
I could sleep for 2 hours and I'm fine. But what does that matter if your son or your wife or somebody close to you dies and you are sacrificing everything for work, right? Because at the end of the day, you work hard so you can spend more time with them.
Right.
But if that just wraps you up in this web, then it's doing the opposite.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I learned from my brother passing, one of the many things, but also from my grandfather's advice, was family matters. Don't ever take that for granted. And whatever you do, let that govern your choices.
Yep.
And so, I think we let her mourn for about 3 days because it was like, I had to go see my dad, right? He lost his son too, and he saw his last breath. And so I went to my dad's house, and we, I know a lot of my Christian friends won't appreciate me saying this, but we sat outside and smoked weed and talked and cried because there was nothing else that he knew how to do.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things that I appreciated from that moment was seeing the change in my dad. I knew that my dad was an angry man in the past, and I knew the kind of man he was. Physical action was the first thing. Whose ass am I going to kick?
Got it.
What doors do I need to go break down? What do I need to do to get answers? Right? Anger, frustration. That was his first mode always.
Yep.
But seeing him, and we're just outside talking, drinking a beer and everything, he was resolved. Not resolved in the sense of like, hey, my son's dead, so what? But more of the sense of there's nothing I can do about it. And being angry isn't going to help.
Wow.
Being bitter isn't going to, And so seeing his response is what changed a lot of my response. Because I was ready to be like, you tell me where we're going to go, whose door we're going to kick down. And I mean, the second or third night, I was hanging out with my cousin, who's a sister to me. and told her the news, and they had to stop me from leaving the house and busting somebody's door in because I was just so angry because I was so tired of not knowing what happened. Everybody we spoke to said, "What happened? How did he die? What's this? What's that?" And I told you, we weren't even allowed to go to his wake. We never saw his funeral. To this day, if my parents go and put roses at his tombstone, the next day they'll be gone. For whatever reason, his wife just doesn't like us and holds this grudge against the family to where anything we had to kind of closure, we've never had.
Fuck, that's awful, man.
Yeah. And that's been the hardest part is when I do get these questions of, because then my brother's friends who I still see in Brownsville, and every now and then they're like, "Hey, how's your brother doing?" And yeah, he died. What happened? This and to tell them, I don't know. Like, and this was at a point in time of my life, my best friend, my father figure. And to know that for 10 years, our relationship was ripped because of this relationship was so painful. But one of the things I had to learn was to stop being bitter. I think that was like the thing that I saw from my dad was bitterness isn't going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
I think the second thing I had to learn was forgiveness. That was one thing in reading the Bible was very apparent, was forgiving those who harm me. And so learning to pray for my brother's wife was hard. Asking God to lead her in the right direction so she could raise those two kids who now don't have a father. Like, these attributes that started coming out were things that I didn't think I had in myself, right? I would rather be angry. I would rather be hateful. I would rather be spiteful. I would rather, again, cause some sort of damage. And seeing my dad and his resolve, and then together learning how to grieve and forgive and love was transformative. Yeah. And so that's where, that's where I found myself in that place was wanting to hurt people because I felt hurt. And knowing, again, seeing my dad respond the way he did was such a powerful thing.
Yeah.
Because even though we didn't have the best relationship growing up, I still saw him as my dad. And I was like, wherever you go, I follow. And the fact that he went towards forgiveness and towards these other things was more of like, all right, I have no excuse to act the way that I've been acting, know? Mm-hmm.
Dude, that's a great lesson, man.
Yeah.
Well, how is your mom now?
I mean, after the second kid, you know what I mean? She actually just went back to Brownsville a few days ago and, was excited to be here because, again, Jack is born. And she's like, "Oh, my gosh, Jordan, Jack, you guys are crazy." So we were in the hospital for 2 days, almost 3. And so she got to spend those nights with my son, Jordan. And she was like, "He is amazing." So, but, I had to actually drive her to not Martha, somewhere in Texas. 2.5 hours away from Austin because her flight got canceled. And so she had to be to a doctor's appointment, the following day. So me and my stepdad met each other up halfway. So I drove for her for 2.5 hours and we kind of talked about that. And she's actually come to a big place of forgiveness and love towards my brother's wife. She actually told me there were about a year ago now, she visited her. And
your mom visited your brother's wife?
My brother's wife visited my mom.
Really?
Yeah. And wasn't anything good. It wasn't anything, the way that my mom described it, she said it seemed like she felt guilty for something and she didn't know how to deal with the guilt. And so she kind of maybe thought coming to see me was going to help. And my mom tried to ask her questions of like, what happened? How did he die? And she said she was just being hysterical and not answering the questions. And so after 20 minutes, she's like, "I don't need this. I've already made peace with my son. I've already made peace with his death. I've already made peace with what you did. And I don't need your apology and I don't need anything from you."
Wow.
And the only thing I know that she would want is to see her grandkids. Like I said, my niece, I think, is 19. The last image I have of her is probably when she's 5. My nephew, I think he just turned 18. And so it's like, I know for her, she would like to see them again.
Yeah.
But the way she's been lately has been, and again, there's something I wrote in my journal was, I always thought my family's faith, we grew up Catholic and went to Catholic mass and CCD and all that kind of stuff. And I always thought it was like a gimmick. I always thought it was just something that they did, and the prayers and all that kind of stuff. But after my brother passed, seeing the way their faith really was, like, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
The foundation.
Yeah, it was just so powerful because, I've been a Christian for maybe 20 years now. I don't think I'm the best Christian. I wish I can do so much better. But I think seeing how they suffered through this made me such a better man and a Christian man. And again, going through the Bible, I don't know if you've ever read it, and the book of Job. There's a book of the Bible called Job, and Job is this wealthy man and has a bunch of kids and has like all this stuff, right? Livestock and land and everything. And one day everything gets taken away from him. All his kids, all his land, all his livestock, and then his body gets stricken with boils. And his wife turns against him. His friends turned against him. And I'm reading this again on my drive to Brownsville, and I think to myself, I'm so blessed right now because my wife, she's here. She's here to help.
Mm-hmm.
My friends are here to help. My parents are here to help. This man was turned. Everybody turned on him, and he still kept his faith in God. I thought about Jesus. Jesus was one of the things that really hit me when I was grieving with God. I was so mad at him, and I was like, "How could you do this?" Like, our relationship was supposed to be good. I was going to move back. We're going to bond. We're going to be brothers again. Like, I had this big vision of what it was going to be. And I'm like, how could you take him away from me? And I'm just yelling at God. And he said, I know how you feel. I lost my son too. You're not the only one. And that's what helped me as well to say, not only am I grieving, but God had to grieve the death of his son.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did he have to grieve the death of his son, he was not taken away from grief. It's not like God saying, well, I'm God, I'm too good to grieve.
Right.
But he grieved. And so when I saw that, God really showed me like, hey, I know you're in this, but you're not in this alone. I'm here with you. But also look at all these other people who are with you, right? And one of the biggest revelations God made to me was, I may have taken a brother away from you, but I've given you many brothers. Look at all these men in your life that I've blessed you with, right? I would consider you a brother. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it sucks. No, I don't want things to be this way.
Right.
But there is beauty that I put around you. And so when the bitterness stopped, the sweetness started. And it was seeing God in those things, right? Like, okay, you may have taken a brother away, but you've given me more brothers. How can I invest in them? How can I love them? How can I cherish them? How can I go to them and build these relationships that I wasn't able to build with my brother, right? And that's what started a lot of the healing process as well. Kind of what you said. I started realizing, hey man, they have suffered as well, and they've lost, right? One of my close friends, they had their first child was a miscarriage, and he was so mad at God for that because he was like, this was like, how could you do this? Put my wife through all this and this and that. And so as I started building a better relationship with the men around me, I learned how to grieve better because I had a community of people to do it with and people who did it well.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm so sorry that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you had to go through that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were telling me about having to break the news to your mom, that hit me to my core because I was the one that had to tell Rochelle. Mm. And and I remember that, man. She just collapsed. It was rough. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's tough, man.
And it doesn't go away.
No.
Right? Like
no.
That is the thing that I've learned. I know you're Uberman fan, and I know you listen to the Uberman Goggins podcast. But they talk about, this part of the brain that you do things that you don't want to do, and it grows that part of your brain, right? And
right.
And when I was going through all this, I remember just being mad at God and being like, I didn't ask for this, right? Like growing up the way I grew up, I didn't want to be addicted to drugs at 12 years old, but I was, right? I didn't want to be in a broken home, but I was. And I was just angry at God because it's like, why would you put me through this? If you're loving, if you're all this, why put me through all this, right? I didn't ask for any of this.
Yeah.
That was my constant thing. I didn't ask for this pain. But the one thing that I've learned is there's a lot of things in life we don't ask for, but there's a lot of things in life we're given. And what determines us is how we handle the things that we're given, right? How do we steward the pleasure and the pain of life, right? Because that's the other thing. You know, when COVID was happening, I was talking to I'm not gonna mention him, but a guy that I know, and he was just talking and bitching about like, oh, when is it gonna go back? And you know, complaining. And I'm like, you've had countless of years of perfect health and perfect weather and perfect this and perfect that, and comes a pandemic and you now complain. Now you say, oh, this is worthless. I saw it as, okay, this thing was given to me. The way that I react is the way my wife is going to see me, is going to also react, or my friends, right? So then I started realizing, even though I'm not the center of this family, somebody has to step up.
Sure.
And somebody has to carry the torch. I think in my life, what I've learned in my jobs is I've always done the job nobody's wanted to do. Whatever the task was that nobody wanted to do, I always ended up doing it. And so when it came to my brother's death, it was like, yeah, you didn't ask to have this, but what you do with this is going to determine not just your life, but your family's life.
Right.
You know, my parents saw me as a foundation now.
Yeah.
They said, what is David going to do? I had to respond with joy. I had to respond with love because I knew what was at stake.
Well, you also, I mean, just to back up and use your own words, you know, your dad set that tone for you.
Exactly.
You know, it changed him in a good way. So yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense.
Yeah. And, you know, and my dad, I think, and my dad has had a very tragic story. Like his father died in his arms. I've had two uncles of mine commit suicide. He's found both of them. His mom, he was the last one to see his mom alive. You know, she died in the hospital. And he, you know, within that year that my brother died, he had about 5 friends die of cancer. And so I just felt like he handled a lot of that very well. And when it came to my brother's death, it was like that final blow. And that's when I was just like, what is he going to do? I was so worried for him because it's like,
how much can he take?
How much can he take?
Yeah.
You know, and so when he responded that way, I was in awe because I'm just like, dude, I would have been knocked out by now.
Yeah.
You know, and he was still up. He was taking it. And that's where for me, I was just like, if he can do it, I can do it, right? If he can pursue forgiveness and love and I don't like the word resolve, but I don't know what other word to use. I feel like what he did was just say, death is a thing. It's real. And we're all going to face it. And there's nothing he can do about it. But what he can do about it is be a mature man about it and say, okay, I have my sons to worry about, you know, and he's disabled and, you know, it's not like he's, I don't want to be rude in saying this. It's not like he's living for much. Right. He loves sports. He loves beer. He loves the simple things in life. So again, when I saw him prosper that way, I'm like, I have so much more to live for.
Yeah.
I have a whole life ahead of me. If I choose to, right? We talked about it as well. I drank a lot at that time, drank a lot of whiskey at that point.
Yeah.
I ended up realizing I can't keep doing this. Why? Because my wife is here. She wants to have kids. Right. And like, we want to grow our family. What is this guy going to do if he lets this dictate his entire life?
Yeah.
This is a moment. You need to take this and you need to run with it. And you actually need to do something great with it. And so then again, kind of what started my podcast was more of my son, because I ended up realizing not just grief is he going to learn from me, but what else does he need to learn, right? We live in a world that doesn't really appreciate a lot of the things men do and doesn't really, you know, value the family as it used to be. And so for me, it's like, I want to instill in my son so many more things and just how to handle pain in life. I want him to grow to be a wise man and not experience the things I had to experience, right? Like, it wasn't a good life, right? I'm glad I don't have that life anymore. But at the end of the day, you know, and I think that's another thing that really hurt with my brother was all the crazy things I did in life, he was a person right next to me. He was the one. And that's why I didn't say so many stories in the past, just because I don't want to defame his name. But I feel like after he passed, it's like more of that, hey, don't be afraid to retell these stories.
Right.
When me and my dad almost got in a fight, he picks me up from my dad's house, takes me to a friend's house. We do some coke, and then we drive a car and you shoot an AK out the window. That was my brother. He was the craziest person I knew, but he was also somebody that said, I want to focus on you. How can I make you happy?
Yeah.
And so we didn't have the best relationship. It wasn't something that was supposed to be written in the books and say, yeah, this is the way brothers should be. But what I want to teach my son is how to love your brother the way I never loved my brother.
Yeah.
And I think, again, learning from these painful things in life of saying, hey, I wish I was there more with him. Okay, maybe I can't do that now, but I could spend time with friends and other brothers in my life.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I didn't love him the best way that I could, but I can teach Jordan and Jack how to love each other the way that we never got to. Sure, all these negative things are a possibility, but so are the positive things.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it's, what the negative thing is going to do. Like, you already know what needs to be done. Right? I think that's the other thing in my head. It's, what needs to be done. You need to stop bitching. You need to stop crying. You need to lift yourself up, and you need to get shit done. Like, it's hard to say that when you have tears in your eyes.
Sure.
It's hard to say that when you're like, but you don't get it. My brother's dead. I wanted to be with him. I wanted a friendship with him. I wanted him to hold my kids. But at the same time, he's not coming back.
Yeah.
So shut up and get things done, because there's a reality in front of you. There's the future in front of you. And if you forego that for this, you're going to do more harm than anything else.
Yeah.
And so I think having to be hard on yourself, and again, with physical fitness is one of those things, right? It's you want to put your body through things that maybe it can't handle so that your brain knows it can.
Mm-hmm.
And so with my brother's death, that was another thing that ended up coming up, was when I had to tell my mom. I was fearful for hours, for almost 2 days. But when I got there, it wasn't a, hey, Mom, let's beat around the bush. It's like it needs to get done.
Yeah.
Right? When we got back to Austin, and it was a few months of just being down, not wanting to work, just depressed, gaining weight, it was like, okay, this shit needs to stop.
Yeah.
Like, how much more can you do this? And then what is this going to do? How much down can you get? And then who are you bringing down with you? Okay, stop. You've already cried. You've already mourned. You need to do something with this pain. And then that's where so many things just started saying, okay, I'm allowed to cry, and I will cry, and I still cry. Like I said, it doesn't go away. I still cry.
Yeah.
But I say, there you go.
Yeah.
You've had it. You said your piece. Now let's move on. Let's keep things going, because at the end of the day, what's going to honor your brother more? You sitting in your room crying, not doing anything with your life, or doing something with it.
Right. Yeah. That's a really good lesson to put out there. Is the world does not stop.
Mm-mm.
It's
Nope.
not going to stop.
Mm-mm.
You're not special.
Mhm.
I'm not special. There are a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
who have gone through this exact same thing. There's a lot more who are going to go through this exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's, I will say, and I think you said it, I just want to reiterate it. I mean, there's a difference between avoiding grieving
Yeah.
and minimizing
Yeah.
your grieving, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Mhm,
Like, I tell my friends this all the time. Like, we could just be hanging out,
Mm-hmm.
and I may start crying for what seems like no reason at all.
Mm-hmm.
Just, it's fine.
Yeah.
Just let it be.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get over it, in 60, 120 seconds, and we're back to normal.
Yeah.
It's just going to happen, man.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you said earlier, and I'm kind of interested in this. I hadn't really thought about this before, but, Rochelle and I, obviously, we are both, we're Connor's parents.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a very similar connection
Yeah.
to Connor. You and your wife,
Mm-hmm.
like you're the brother,
Yeah.
and your wife is your husband.
Mm-hmm.
He's brother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that dynamic like? I mean, I'm sure she knew your brother, loved your brother and all that sort of stuff, but in a different way than you did.
Well, she only, I think, got to meet him once. Like I said, it was more of a passing, like they were leaving the house kind of thing. And so that's what I mean. She knows him through stories, right? And I think that's where she's helped me in the grieving process, where there are times where I just say a story, right? We can be eating food, we could be watching TV, we could be doing something, and I'll just say, oh man, that reminds me this one time, me and my brother, da-da-da, and then I just laugh and I cry a little bit, and then it stays quiet, and she's there to experience it with me.
Yeah.
And so she knows a lot about him because the countless stories that I tell her.
Sure.
But yeah, she never got to meet him. Like I said, it was maybe one time passing, and it probably wasn't the best version of him because he wasn't at his healthiest.
Right.
But I think the one thing that she's really helped me with is knowing when I need room. Right. So for me, because of the pain, my immediate reaction was work. Right. Shove all the work in, do all that I can work, this and this and that. And I think she realized that I don't need to work. I need to mourn. I think she realized that early. And so when there were times where there was jobs that I could have done, great paying jobs that would take my mind away from it, she would probably help me pass on them and be like, oh, it's okay, we don't need it, or whatever it is, right? And so I think she knew more than I did that I was using work as a coping mechanism. And so I think she does a really good job. I think she knows me very well and knows if it's like, hey, you should do this, I'm going to research it and say, well, what are the benefits? What are this? And, I get in my little brain. But I think she also knows me to say, let me not say anything and let me just leave him where he is and know that this is where he needs to be.
Yeah.
And so I think that's very wise of her sometimes to not say something when, or like she helps keep the noise out. And for someone who likes noise to cope with things, I never knew that about myself until struggling with this and then seeing the way that she's kind of supported me in the struggle of just letting me kind of deal with the pain in the best way that I could, and not trying to teach me anything. And of course, she hasn't, she lost her grandmother during COVID. And, like I said, I've dealt with a lot of loss in my life. And so I don't think any part of her was saying, hey, here's a podcast or here's an article, or here's this, here's that, right? It was more of a, you need to cry.
Yeah.
And if I hear you crying, I'm not going to open the door and say what's wrong. If I hear you yelling and screaming in your office to God, I'm not going to walk in and say, are you okay?
Yeah.
Right. She leaves me the room to do that. And it isn't until, maybe a year later that I realized that. And I'm like, thank you for giving me that room.
That's impressive, man. Cause that's not easy to walk that line. Yeah. Hey, I got to pause and take a piss.
Do it.
Right?
Do it.
And Liquid Death, why do you make such giant cans?
So it's delicious cans.
Popping a cold brew. Yeah, man, it is really, I'm in awe of the fact that your wife is able to eloquently navigate that situation with you, because I know a lot of times, my experience has been, when one of us is sad, like me or Rochelle, it's like, Rochelle, if she's sad, it's not easy to know when she needs space or when she needs attention. The one thing that I will say, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've had to tell a couple of my friends, like, when I am sad and I'm crying and stuff, just don't try and make me suppress it. Like, don't try and...
It's okay, man.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Like, it doesn't work. Just, if you want to put your hand on my shoulder and not even say a word, that'll let me know that you're there and you understand, and that is plenty. But yeah, when somebody's like, stop, I'm going to try to do something to make you stop crying. It's like, no, that's not what I need. And it's easy because it's and I get where it's coming from. They don't want to see their friend in pain.
Exactly.
And so they're reacting to that and trying to, take away the pain.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work.
Well, and that's where, that's where I struggled a lot, was not knowing how to navigate the emotion.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, my brother passes, my son's born. I, for almost a year, could not be happy with them. And that was hard.
Did you feel guilty
I felt
being
guilty.
happy? Yeah.
I felt so guilty being happy.
That is a tough one, man.
And that's what I mean. It's like, I didn't know that that could be a thing.
It's a thing.
And so I find myself sitting there, and, you know, my 3-month-old son and my wife are playing on the floor and laughing. And I am stopping myself because I'm telling myself, you can't enjoy this.
Right.
Like, your brother just died. Are you really going to be happy while he's dead? And this, and like, just constantly beating myself up to where, you know, even having the space to navigate that was, you know. So one day I'm filming an event. It was a July 4th event.
Okay.
One of the bad things about me is that I'm a very nice guy,
Yeah,
and I
you
will
are
say yes.
definitely a
I
nice
will
guy.
say yes to a lot of things.
Okay.
So I'm filming this July 4th event. The Spasmatics are playing. It was
Oh,
awesome.
I've seen them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
they're
great.
awesome.
They're great.
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
them. And so, you know, so you could already know it was a high
Yes.
energy place, right?
Yeah.
So then this guy's over here. Again, a lot of my Christian friends may not appreciate this, but this guy's over here chatting me up. And then his friend comes up. He's like, hey, man, sorry about him. He's just drunk and high on mushrooms. And I'm like, whoa, I'm a little tipsy, and I would love some mushrooms. I just said it to say it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, dude ends up coming back and puts mushrooms in my hand. And I'm like, okay, thanks. And he's like, yeah, he's like, you could take all of them. I don't know if you've ever done them. And he's like, or you could take them this way. And I was like, oh, it's fine. And so I just kind of ate them while he was there. Didn't even think anything of it, right?
And you didn't know this guy.
Didn't know this guy. Again, I'm like, you're being kind enough to give me this. I don't want to be rude, kind of thing. So that was my brain, right? That's where being a nice guy gets you in somewhat trouble. So 2 a.m, you know, I'm about to head out, and it kicks in.
Oh.
And my wife is kind of like, if you need to stay there, stay there.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't good, right? Again, 2, 3 month, 4-year-old son. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, 6 months. It was July. So 6 months. Man, on the drive home, I cried like nobody's business.
Mm.
Just the realization of who I was blessed to marry, that she gave me the freedom to go through that and didn't judge me one bit.
Right.
Right?
Instead of saying you dumbass.
Yeah, exactly.
You
What
know?
did you do? This and this and that. Like,
yeah.
maybe I took them because I wanted to deal with it, right? Because I've heard podcasts talk about mushrooms and this and that. I don't know if you want to think about it subconsciously. I have no idea.
Right.
But I know, you know, it wasn't that far of a drive, so I'm like, I could drive home, right? But I just remember crying, and I sat in the car in the driveway for a while, because I just remember just being a flood of emotion of just saying, okay, he's dead.
Yeah.
You're not going to use anything to take that away from you. Don't try to talk yourself out of it. Don't try. He's dead.
Yeah.
Never coming back. Your wife, look at how she's been through all this. And, you know, I even told her, thank you so much for giving me the space and giving me the room to do this.
Good for you for doing that, man.
Dude, it was a realization that, again, I don't know, you know, we've talked about how mushrooms are something, and there's experts out there who know more about it psychologically. But the breakthrough that I experienced with that, to not just cope with my brother's death, it's right here.
Mm-hmm.
It's right there. You're staring it right in the face, and you're not going to use anything to hush it away. Deal with it. And it was just like 20 minutes of crying, because it's like, I didn't know that I was coping with it in those other ways.
Wow.
So boom. But then the other realization of, I'm walking into this home, and my wife isn't bitching at me. She's not yelling at me. She has every right to. She's not doing it. And again, I told her this. I'm like, thank you so much. Thank you so much for just being my wife and being with me through this, and not trying to tell me this or tell me that or solve it in whatever way you think.
Right.
But just letting me. And then whenever you knew I needed it, you were there to hold me. You were there to, you know, help me up, whatever it was. And so I think when it does come to grief and loss, another bad thing to do is push that person away.
Oh, for sure.
Right. And
yeah.
and I knew I may not have been doing it right intentionally, but I was doing it unintentionally.
Yeah.
I was going into the office and working, editing all night just so that I didn't have to go to bed with them.
Mm-hmm.
And she never held that grudge against me.
Wow.
She never once said, you were a shitty husband in those times. You were a piece of crap. I needed you. I just had a new baby. She never once pointed her finger at me and said, you messed up. She let me just go through all that, and she held it down. And so for me, it's like, I had to tell her thank you. I had to be like, man, you know, because maybe any other woman would have added fuel to the fire.
Sure.
Maybe everyone, oh, you're doing too much. You're mourning too much. You need to get over it, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But she really just gave me the space that I needed. And maybe sometimes that's also what you need.
Yeah.
You need that person to help you, give you that space, and not push that person away. Because I feel like that's definitely something I could have done.
Yeah. Well, she's a keeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely after the second one.
You are very lucky, man. Good for you. Yeah. I'm trying right now. So I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but they're doing a study at the University of Texas right now.
Yeah.
Using psychedelics and people who are grieving. I think their focus is on people who have, I can't remember the exact words, but it's like the kind of grief that people can't even get out of bed type of grief.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've been talking to some folks over there, and I think we're going to get somebody on the
Nice.
podcast to
That'd
talk
be
about
great.
psychedelics. Yeah, because I've never taken them. Only thing I know is what I hear and what I read.
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated.
And like I said, I don't even know if what I took was the kind that was medically, but it was one of those where, again, I admit I was dumb in taking it. I shouldn't have done it.
Yes. Let's just say, kids, don't take drugs that a stranger just hands you at a concert.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
That's not being a nice guy. That's being a dumb guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was being very dumb. And I admit to that, right? And that's what I mean. It's like I even apologized to my wife the next day. I'm like, I knew I shouldn't have done it. But again, like that experience, of just kind of like, it's what I needed.
Sure.
Right. And it's not that I couldn't get there without it, because I think I definitely did and I could have. But I think what I tend to do a lot is put on a strong face, even to myself.
Yeah.
And so when I was dealing with that, it was me also saying to myself, hey man, you're good. You're right. Yeah. Oh, you got this. Right. And that was also a coping mechanism that wasn't good, because I wasn't good and I wasn't all right, you know? And the first person who I broke the news to was my cousin, who is a brother to me. I've known him since we're less than a year old.
Yeah.
And we've been together. He moved to Austin with me. He lives here now. Like,
oh, awesome.
So, and I called him and we met up at Little Dottie, and I could not stop crying. And he was a rock as well, because I remember rather than him breaking down and him crying, he was there as a rock as well, and just saying, okay, like, what are you going to do now? Like, he kind of helped me think through some things, and like, what are you going to do? How are you going to tell your mom? Okay. And like, what else needs to happen? And again, our families kind of run into each other a lot. And so I kind of told him as well, hey, let your parents know. And if my mom finds out and they're around or anybody hears about it, you know. And so, but I think the one thing I've appreciated most has been the people who I've allowed to be in my life. I feel so much more happier with them after all that, because it really was like, you know, there was a group of guys at church that I just texted when I found out, you know, and they mourned with me the entire time. They were texting and they were checking in and, hey, do you need anything? How can we be there? Cigar nights, whiskey nights. Hey, come talk. Don't, you know? And so I think, again, another thing we tend to do when we grieve is isolate ourselves. We don't need people. Like, I just want to be me.
Yeah.
And we need those people around us to be like, hey, like, how can we help as well? You know?
Makes me wonder, you know, just to kind of bring this full circle to what you were saying earlier, it makes me wonder if, and it's probably not an if at all. It's probably, this is the way it is, but there are people that are placed in our lives for a reason, like a very, very, very specific reason.
Yeah.
Obviously, your wife was placed in your life for a very specific reason. And, you know.
Well, and I even say that about my son.
Yeah.
You know, like the fact that he was the fact that he was the news that was going to follow that. To me, I literally thought to myself, I don't know what else would have brought my mom any joy.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean? Like the fact that it was the death of my brother, and then 3 days later, the announcement of my son. It's like, I couldn't have written that. I couldn't have put that in a book.
Yeah.
And I had to experience that. And it was painful, but also to see my son as somebody who is a joy giver, right? Anytime he's around people, he's so full of joy, so happy, and just to know what his ethos or where he came from, like out of the darkest part of my life.
Yeah.
And he is this bright, shining light. You know what I mean? And I don't even know how to explain that, dude. That's one of those things where I'm like, God knew that this was going to happen. Therefore, this needed to happen, because I don't know what else would have kept my mom on track.
Yeah. That's, you talk about two opposite ends of the spectrum, man. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I guess, I mean, there's so many little bits and pieces in this, but I think my big takeaways are the people in your life who have been there to support you, have been there for you, definitely help you get through this as best you can, right? And like you said, it never goes away. It never goes away. And then the other one is, dude, you've got a super strong faith. I can tell.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't not have faith or anything. I think we talked about this before. I'm not like a non-believer or anything like that, but I'm also not like, I'm not there. I'm not at the same place that you are. But I think that and I've had a handful of people who have reached out to me, people from my past, and they've reached out to me kind of on that, spiritual angle, I'm praying for you, and not just words, like I'm praying for you, but like legitimately. Yeah. And then I just thought, there's a guy, we had an event at the coffee bar, and there's a guy who I met, this is a while ago, and if I remember right, I think he's a pastor, and for whatever reason, he continues to reach out to me. Really? And this is before Connor died. He's reached out to me and invited me to all these kind of like men's get-together events that are really close to my house. Yeah. Like, especially if I go by boat, I can get there really fast. Nice. And I've never taken advantage of that. And I think as soon as we're done here, I'm going to shoot him a text and find out when the next one is. And I'm going to go, man, because going back to, there are people that are placed in your life for a reason. Yep. I can't avoid that. Yeah.
And I think the great thing that I've come to understand in the faith, right, and it's kind of what I said earlier, God can sympathize with every single one of us. There isn't anybody in this world that God cannot say, I know what you're going through, right? He is a father who lost his son, and he had to deal with death. His son was perfect, never did anything wrong, was wrongly accused and wrongly killed, right? Talk about injustice, right? You read the entire Bible, and there's stories and stories of people who have suffered, but that God, one of my favorite scriptures is that God will turn your mourning into joy. And that was something I constantly wrote in my journal, that he will turn your mourning into joy. It isn't like that you cash in your mourning and he gives you joy. He says it's almost like a butterfly turning into, or a worm turning into a butterfly. Yeah, it's like this suffering is going to turn into joy. I can't see it right now, but I know that I have seen it in the past, right? I have a lot of friends who have lost loved ones, and I've seen it in real time where their mourning turns into joy. I've experienced the times where I was really dark and I'm not there anymore. I do feel joy and I do feel happiness. And so I don't go to religion or even to Christianity or my faith as something's like, oh, this is going to make everything better, right?
Right.
No, it's something that, again, continues to tell me you're not alone in this. Yeah. Not only are you not alone in this because other people suffer, but the creator of the universe suffered with you. Yeah. So if you need anybody to cry to, if you feel like you don't have anybody to cry out to, there is one person who's going to say, I know exactly what you're going through. Wow. And so that's where I let my faith lead me, is into the arms of God. And for him to say, now, right, and there's another scripture where it says, cast all your burdens on me, right? And that's something I had to do. Is like, God, I have this burden, I have this weight, and it's really bringing me down. And God said, give it to me.
Wow.
And so those are the things that I think I've let my faith bring me to, is the realization that this is way too hard.
Yeah.
And I'm not called to do it alone. And God has put people around me so that I can do it with them. And as we do, right, the Bible even talks about sharpening one another. And so as we sharpen one another, and as we grieve with one another and rejoice with one another, we end up actually modeling what it looks like to love each other. And so for me, that's where, again, a lot of the grieving process has brought me to looking at people in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And saying, I don't know who you are, I don't know what you've been through, and I really don't give a shit. I'm going to love you because you probably have some pain in your life. And so any person I interact with, it's completely different now. I don't want to debate. I don't want to argue. I don't want to BS. I just want to learn to love you the best way that I can. And so I feel like that has been one of the best outcomes from my brother's death, is saying everybody in front of you is a person you can love. So take that advantage. Well,
on that note, man, we need more of that in the world. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for sharing that. It was, I got a lot of stuff to think about today, man.
Awesome.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear.
All right.